Well, hello everyone, this is CJ with Cycletron. I had a suggestion from a viewer, Ray Smith, for me to do a video about all the motorcycles I've owned over the years. I think that's a good idea. I want to expand on that topic to include a discussion of why I bought a given motorcycle at a certain time of my life, what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, what caused me to sell that motorcycle and get something else. So I think a good place to start would be to discuss why I got interested in motorcycles to begin with. I'd have to say it goes back to my uncle's farm in rural Missouri back in, it was probably around 1975 when I was 11, 12 years old. My cousins had a Honda Trail 90 and they let me ride it in an adjacent field. It hadn't been mowed in a while. It was had weeds about the height of the handlebars. So they slapped a 3/4 fiberglass helmet on my head, didn't bother to fasten the chin strap, and away I went. It didn't occur to me to ride that Trail 90 in any way but full throttle, which is what I did. It seemed like I was going like 80 miles an hour, but I was probably going 35, maybe 40, but the sensation of speed was fantastic. And talk about doing something with wild abandon. That's exactly how I rode that bike. It was an utter blast, and it was quite a thrill. And I have to admit, I suspect I've been trying to chase that thrill ever since, with subsequent motorcycle ownership and experience in riding them. I don't know that I've quite recaptured the original thrill of that first experience of blasting through that farmer's field, but might have even been kind of reckless how I was riding. As it was related to me later, I guess my dad was talking to my uncle and said, "Who is that guy out there flying through your field?" And I guess my uncle said, "That looks like your boy." So next thing you know, my dad walks over towards that field and practically clotheslines me off that bike. And as he correctly pointed out, I could have ridden into a big hole in the field or hit a big rock or anything like that. But none of that occurred to me while I was riding. It was just too thrilling to think about practical things like that. But my dad came around later on when I was around 22. He co-signed a loan so I could buy a 535 Yamaha Virago, which was my first bike. And luckily that summer I had a summer job where I was going on a round-trip commute of about 100 miles to Whiteman Air Force Base to do some construction inspection. So that was awesome, being able to ride my new bike 100 miles a day. So I taught myself how to ride in vacant parking lots, and off I went, going back and forth to that summer job. And then after I graduated later that year, took a job up in Omaha, and after riding that 535 for a while, I was going on longer and longer rides, so I decided to get something a little bit bigger. That's when I tried to get a 883 Sportster. That didn't work out. They wanted too much money. They didn't want to take the Virago on trade, so I ended up getting a 920 Yamaha Virago. And what I really liked about that bike was the cool LCD display. It was pretty high-tech for back in the day, sort of reminiscent of a lot of 80s design elements. And you know, the funny thing is, that might have drawn me to this bike, that experience of being so thrilled with that Yamaha display. That might have been one of the things that appealed to me about this Katana. You know, when you get a motorcycle, a big part of it's an emotional decision, and you might be touching on things from your past that you don't even realize are connected. So I rode that 920 Virago for a while, then I took a job transfer out to Sacramento. So I rode that bike for a while longer, then I decided I wanted to get an inline 4. So I got a 92 Honda 750 Nighthawk. And that bike was a blast. going from a V-twin to inline 4. Even dropping the displacement, that Honda had so much more horsepower. And I rode that thing everywhere. I remember I took a trip from Sacramento to Vancouver, Canada. Rode up the Pacific Coast Highway of California and Oregon. Went to Vancouver Island. And I remember getting hassled at the border by a Canadian immigration official. They couldn't understand why I would come to Canada and not have business there, not know anybody there. I mean, that's what I thought they called tourism, but anyway, it seemed like I was getting the third degree, but they finally let me in, which is funny because years later I had to go back to Canada, this time to Calgary, and I flew in to do a job, and I'm an engineer, and man, they practically wouldn't let me in. There's like, why are you here? Why can't a Canadian engineer do this job? On and on and on. And it must have been about the money. They must have thought I was taking money away from a local Canadian engineer, especially maybe at a higher pay rate, because the guy that worked for me at the time, who was about 25, breezed right in through immigration. So either that or the Canadians are picking up some shifty vibe that I might be giving off, and maybe they know something I don't. But yeah, that 750 Nighthawk was a blast. And then I decided to go to grad school at UT Austin, so I brought that bike with me. Then I wasn't quite finished with grad school. I got hard up for cash to finish and sold that bike reluctantly to get enough money to finish my coursework. Then I graduated shortly after that and got a full-time job, engineering job. And one of the first things I did after getting that job, probably within 3 months, is I bought a brand new Yamaha Gts 1000 in 1993. And that was a super high-tech bike for that time. It cost $13,000 new, which is about $25,000 today. So it was like the 93 version of a hyper bike to me anyway. And it made me realize I have an appreciation for high-tech gadgetry. Although I also appreciate fairly low-tech bikes too. So about 4 or 5 years later, taking that bike all over the place, I get married, start having kids. My wife and I decided to start an import gift item business. We'd lived in Thailand in the 96 to 97, so we had some connections to people that produced kind of arts and crafts things that we started selling on the internet back in the late 90s. Then we decided to get a retail store to feature that stuff, and that business was a failure, but we learned a lot of things that helped us start a successful engineering business about 15 years ago. So those lessons were hard-earned and costly, but effective. But I guess I've got a history of selling my motorcycles when I have to raise cash for something that's really essential to me and my goals. And so when times are good, I have no problem spending money on the bikes that I want. Not really out of a sense of entitlement, it's just stuff I like and I enjoy. But I'm also willing to forego it if I have to, at least for a short period of time, hopefully. So then in 2006, I decided it's time to get a motorcycle again, so I get a Honda VTX 1300 Cruiser, and I rode that bike for about a year, and then we start noticing all these car versus motorcycle crashes around my neighborhood, probably within a quarter mile of my house. And my wife was pregnant with our youngest child at the time, and we had 3 other little kids. And it just kind of cooled me out on maybe that wasn't the best time to be on a bike, at least taking the additional risk of riding on a motorcycle. So I again reluctantly sold that bike on eBay, and I got full price for it because I sold it to a UT alum, University of Texas. It's the University of Texas, by the way, as they'll remind you if you don't say it right. And he liked the kind of burnt orange metallic color, so there you go. So then I was off bikes from about 2007 to 2014 when I get a 2014 2014 Yamaha FC09, that inline triple. That bike was an utter blast. But at the time, we knew some people. We'd go on weekend rides with a group of other motorcyclists, and my wife would go with me. And, you know, that bike really isn't made for two-up riding, not for any length of time, and the slope of that seat is such that it really, if you're a guy, it'd mash your stuff up against the tank, which is none too comfortable. So I decided, I better get a bike that's more comfortable for two-up riding, so I got a 2015 Harley Street Bob. And at first I really liked that bike. It was certainly comfortable. You could fit 2 six-packs of your favorite drink easily in each saddlebag. But I don't know, maybe it was the bike, or maybe it's just because I've been riding so many sport bikes. I was not comfortable on that Street Bob in curves at all. It just seemed to wallow. And actually, that's probably the shortest time I've ever owned a motorcycle. I got rid of that thing after about 6 months. And, you know, around 2015 is when the chronology gets kind of muddled, because I get into this feedback loop of trying to get a motorcycle that was as sporty as possible, yet still accommodating enough for two-up riding so I could take my wife. And I do sensible things like get a 2016 XDiavel S that has a postage stamp rear seat. My poor wife, I don't even know what I was thinking on that. But I had that for a while. Then I had a 2016 Multistrada, and that's when I went to what I call the two-bike solution. You know, the XDiavel S for cruising around solo, and then the Multistrada for two-up riding. Except that seat's pretty miserable for two-up riding. They sell an upgraded seat for $1,000. They call it their comfort seat, but even that I don't think would cut it. I made the mistake of subjecting my wife to about a 700-mile ride in a 24-hour period, and she was so uncomfortable in the back of that Multistrada, she wouldn't go ride with me for another 2 years. So that wasn't good. In 2015, we bought a Kawasaki 650 Vulcan S Cafe bike, and that's one of my favorite bikes, especially for the money. It's got a lot of power, performance, and back in 2015, I bought a 20-acre property south of where I live, out in the sticks, mowed about half of it, so it was nice mowed pasture, nice and flat. And that's when I had my kids learning on dirt bikes. We had 3 different Yamaha dirt bikes, a 50cc and a 110. Those had automatic clutches, and then they worked their way up to a 125cc Yamaha dirt bike with a manual clutch. And that was a good experience for them. And then at one point, my wife was actually riding that 650 Vulcan out in the field, and she had a blast on that thing. And I was looking forward to her progressing to street riding, but then my oldest son goes away to college, and we thought, you know, he'd have a lot of fun having that bike down there for goofing around. So we let him take it down to school, and within a few months, he totaled it out in a wreck. Luckily, he wasn't hurt. He had all his gear on. Had a little bit of road rash where his jacket rode up on him, but that was about it. And we said, you know what? He's done. If he ever gets another motorcycle, it'll be strictly on his own. And so, a few months later, he's in a bad situation involving loss of one of his friends, and we really kind of wanted to help him out, just kind of take his mind off things. So, what do you do for a kid that totals out a motorcycle? 3 months later, you get him a Ducati 821 Monster with Termi pipes. But man, he rode the heck out of that bike and had a good time. So really it was the best thing for him, and he was much more careful riding after that initial experience. I guess that's another topic for everyone out there. Do you think you have to have a near miss or even a lay down or any situation like that on a bike to gain a healthy dose of respect for how you should ride a motorcycle? Are you one of those exceptional people that can learn from other people's mistakes without having to make your own? So let me know in the comment section which category you fall into.